Okay, thank you everyone for joining us today. Welcome to another great webinar from the Bike to Work Society's webinar workshop series. My name is Justine Bokenik and I'm the Bike Skills Program Coordinator and also today's moderator for our webinar. Today we're presenting Making Space, how local municipalities and parks are adapting to COVID-19. In a way, this webinar is a follow-up to our first webinar, which was presented by our education manager, Lana Taves, and that was COVID and the bike. We were listening to the feedback given by participants of that webinar who overwhelmingly asked for more information on the local projects and restrictions and adaptations that are being put into place to protect us from COVID-19. So we knew we were going to have to ask some experts for help on this subject. So today I'm so pleased to be joined by some incredibly knowledgeable folks. From BC Parks, we have Kirby Villeneuve and Christine Rikley. From the CRD, we have Jeff Leahy. And finally, from City of Victoria, we're joined by Sarah Webb. I can't thank these folks enough for showing up today, and we're all so excited to hear what they have to say. Few housekeeping notes. Each speaker will be given about 12 minutes to speak, so we'll have time for a Q&A at the end still. I suggest that folks write their specific questions to specific speakers in the question box that's located in it'll be on the right side of your screen, your control panel. But we'll be taking questions but you can ask your questions whenever you like. I'd also like to remind everyone that because these webinars are being offered for free, we rely on your generous donation to keep the programs going. Conveniently, our donation button is located on the same webpage that has a list of our upcoming webinars and our past webinars. So you can go to biketoworkvictoria.ca/webinar workshops to find the recording of this webinar and also our past webinars. Speaking of recordings, if folks are experiencing technical difficulties, my suggestion would be to close down the application and then reopen it with the same join link. And then if you missed anything, you can just check out the recording later this week. Thank you all so much again for coming. Once again, this webinar is hosted by the Bike to Work Society and featuring guests from BC Parks, the CRD, and City of Victoria. And now we get to the exciting part of the webinar, and I would like to introduce both Kirby Villeneuve and Christine Rikley. Kirby is entering his 31st year with BC Parks. His title is Recreation Section Head, working for the Capital Investments Program and Provincial Services Branch. His program focuses on park facility access management and capital project delivery. Kirby rides mostly for getting outside and fitness. He enjoys road riding, gravel, mountain biking, and most recently an electric assist Class 1 mountain bike. He has been riding close to home for the last few months, but plans to start branching out shortly to other Vancouver Island locations and elsewhere in the province. Christine has worked for BC Parks for 6 years and has lived in Victoria for 14 years. Christine is the BC Parks area supervisor for Cowichan and Peninsula the Cowichan and Peninsula area. When she's not at work, you can find her kayaking, racing sailboats, and volunteering for search and rescue. And one of her favorite places to cycle is in the Galloping Goose between Souk and Victoria. So I'm just going to turn the controls over to Christine, and they can get started.
Great, thank you. So I'll just briefly talk about BC Parks' approach to COVID and our reopening plan, and then we have Kirby here as well to talk a bit about more broader our cycling infrastructure and future plans for that, and answering any questions that people have around that, around cycling in general in our parks. So BC Parks, we, as most people I'm sure are aware, has started reopening since we were closed during the height of COVID. During our reopening, safety has been our priority. So we've been working to open facilities, parks, and campgrounds as soon as we can. But you'll notice that some things still aren't opening because the safety of our park operators and our visitors remains our top priority for now. So what reopening safely means for BC Parks is setting up protocols for enhanced cleaning, limiting campsite occupancy to a maximum of 8 people, and that includes visitors, limiting or having no access to shared spaces that make social distancing more challenging, such as up to now it's been group sites and picnic shelters and playgrounds. Now, some of our, I did mention not all of our parks are open yet. Some have remained closed, and there's kind of 2 primary reasons for some parks remaining closed. One is those that have really high levels of visitation. So they've remained closed due to health and safety concerns regarding those, related to those visitation rates. And because of that high visitation, it makes it challenging to enforce social distancing in really high traffic areas. So some of the ones that come to mind, for instance, is the area of Cathedral Grove is still closed, or some of our hot springs are still closed. And then the second reason some parks have remained closed is for the safety of Indigenous communities. So some parks and protected areas have remained closed where we work with Indigenous communities and support their efforts to limit visitors to those areas and keep COVID out of their communities. Now, having said that, all the provincial parks in the Greater Victoria area, the provincial parks are now open. So if you're looking for updates on which parks are open and which parks are closed, if you're traveling a little bit further further away from home, I'm just, I'll pop up my screen, but you can see all the parks on our website. Justine, are you able to see my screen? Yeah, perfect. So yeah, on our main webpage, if you go to our homepage, this is what you'll see. And then really quick, you can go to the parks that are affected by COVID, and that takes you to a searchable screen that, for instance, I could, once it does open up, it takes a little bit of time, but you can type in the name of the park that you're looking for, and it will immediately start to show up there, and it'll tell you if it's closed or not. So for instance, Goldstream Provincial Park is still open, whereas maybe if I type in like Macmillan Park, you'll see a closed symbol still there. Now, if you're looking for more information on what's open in those parks, if I go to Goldstream, our website also will document what areas are open versus where certain facilities may remain closed. So on that note, even though some parks are open, like I said, certain facilities have remained closed, like pump tracks, playgrounds, group sites, nature houses, places that have kind of that high touch feature, where we can't guarantee potentially that COVID wouldn't be spread. Now, having said that as well, you might have noticed on our Facebook pages that our playgrounds and pump tracks, we've gotten safety plans in place for those, and those are starting to gradually reopen. We're hoping by the weekend, but we're taking it slow just to make sure that the safety of everyone remains paramount. But group picnic shelters and group sites, they do remain as high touch services, so they are going to remain closed for the foreseeable future until we have all plans in place. What facilities remain open or closed has been based largely on following PHO guidance and other safety issues, such as some trails that are too narrow or things like that. But for the most part, like I said, all campgrounds, front and backcountry trails, beaches, picnic areas, washroom facilities, bike racks, hand pumps, water taps, all of those are now open. One question that came was, are fountains open? And those are not, just because the very virtue of putting your face near something. Like I think I alluded to before, we have implemented enhanced cleaning protocols for shared facilities like bathrooms, so they are being cleaned more frequently. But you will see signs that are up that are asking all visitors to take extra precautions, wash hands more often, or bring your own hand sanitizer, things like that, so that you are sanitizing your hands after you leave these facilities. And we are posting physical distancing signage in parking lots and near trailheads and our washroom facilities as well, just to remind visitors to keep that distance between them. You'll also notice some of the trail systems in the Victoria, the provincial parks in the Victoria area, where we can, we've recommended going in one direction to try to avoid traffic that's going off trail. It's a voluntary thing. We're asking people to consider it where they can, and you'll see maps at those trailheads recommending which way to go. Usually it's clockwise, but we are trying to do that just for everyone's safety. But personal accountability of visitors, we are doing everything we can to ensure parks are safe, but park visitors are in the end responsible for their own safety. So we just encourage everyone can do their part to stay safe and keep others safe, and just to respect those ongoing closures for when that's the case. So on that note of personal accountability, I'll go back to our website. There is a handy little brochure that we've published. So if I go to our response, and there's a BC Parks guide to camping during COVID. So anyone thinking of visiting our campgrounds or even our day use areas, we do encourage everyone to take a look at that. And it has some tips on, you know, what we would hope everyone kind of takes into consideration, and what you can expect, or different tips that we're asking people to follow. One of the questions also that had been presented ahead of time is BC Parks closing roads for cycling and pedestrian use? With BC Parks, we don't have a huge road network in our parks, so they are remaining open for vehicle use at this time, because that's the only way really into those parking lots, and because most of our parks, they're not necessarily super local. So people do need to, unfortunately, or fortunately, still drive to those parks in the most part. But we are asking everyone, as always, just to stay safe and respect that they are shared roadways. For trail systems, we do have a number of trails in the Greater Victoria area in provincial parks that are open to biking, and you can find information on which trails those are on individual park pages as well. But kind of segueing into that, Kirby, did you want to speak about, I'll let you speak about kind of our cycling infrastructure and future direction on that?
Sure, I'll be probably a little bit more brief, but thanks for that, Christine. And yeah, so Christine is in the regional operations branch, so she's more involved in the, you could say, sort of boots on the ground staff that are actually out there in the parks, and ensuring that these types of measures are implemented, and designing how these types of measures would be implemented. My role is more around improving and adding capital infrastructure. So, you know, I'll talk a little bit about that. You know, as an agency, we certainly recognize that, you know, cycling not only is a healthy activity, and it's good for the carbon footprint, but it's also a more contemporary form of recreation. And we're always striving to look at more contemporary recreation, and not just your sort of old school camping, angling, hunting, things like that, hiking. So we want to see, you know, where we can improve things for cycling. So a few years ago, about 3 years ago, we recognized that, and we recognized the value to tourism, cycling. So we did a bit of a system-wide scan. We looked across our system provincially. So we were looking at, you know, where cycling is occurring in parks. We were looking at where opportunities exist to enhance various forms of that activity, where we have facilities and services that provide to support that activity, and where opportunities would exist to expand these types of facilities and services. So examples of facilities and services that support cycling in our system can include things like multi-use trails, you know, ranging from rustic single track type trails to well-established paths like rail trails, things like that. Looking at targeting the youth in campgrounds, so things like pump tracks and skills trails for youth, putting those in campgrounds, and that's been really popular over the last 5 years or so. Looking at things like walk-in, bike-in campsites, which are a little more friendly for your cycle touring type people. Along with that, we need to provide, you know, more shower facilities, and cycling long distances from campground to campground. Those types of facilities are really appreciated. Looking at additional parking, signage, things like shared workstations and bike wash stations, and then looking more into the future around secure bicycle storage options, and also looking at accommodating e-bikes now. So things like, you know, you come to a campground, you want to be able to obviously charge your bike up. So providing a hookup for that sort of thing. In that sort of initial scan and inventory that we did, we kind of broke it down into several categories of information. So we're looking at campgrounds that were in close proximity or contiguous to large or medium-sized mountain bike trail networks, with the purpose of bringing more people to those parks. So an example of that type of campground would be a place like Mount Fernie, near Fernie, if you're familiar with that part of the province. But you're about 2 hours from Calgary. You get a lot of people coming across. These days, we don't want to see too many people coming across from Alberta, but that would be an example of one of those parks where it's surrounded by mountain bike trail networks. We're also looking at campgrounds that currently are with improvement could contribute better to cyclotouring and bike packing networks. So for the island, for example, a place like Rathtrevor Beach is a very suitable place for people to ride bikes for cycle touring, and there's ample places where they can camp comfortably on a grassy field and get provided that sort of amenity, as opposed to your sort of traditional large RV stall campground. We're also looking at parks that currently have or have potential to develop multi-use trail networks. So when we say multi-use, we're talking non-motorized, but basically pedestrian and bicycles. Especially those that have existing partnerships with local community groups like bike clubs and things like that would be willing to take those on and maintain those into the future for us. Also looking at parks that currently have potential for sort of major cycle pathways or contribute to rail trails and things like that. So the green transportation network, or as they like to say, active transportation these days. Also looking at parks that we want to see more of these pump tracks put in, the ones that we have the pump tracks, and also looking at where cycling on trails is currently or allowed and allowable. So, we've got about 50 or so parks across the province where bicycles are allowed on trails, not just on the park roads. I think we've got about 9 of these pump tracks built in different campgrounds now, and yeah. So that's the type of infrastructure that we're looking to improve upon. So I guess the closest example, now these are probably mostly Victoria people maybe that are joining this webinar. So an example would be Goldstream Park. It's a flagship park. It's popular. It's one of the closest ones to the capital. So that is the ideal location where we'd be looking at adding more walk-in campsites, bike-in campsites. We've already got a nice pump track and skills trails for kids. But getting from Goldstream Campground across to the day use area, getting across the highway, the Trans-Canada Highway, that's not for the faint of heart. So we've always been thinking about how can we improve upon that, and we look at working with our friends, the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure, and we've been working with them for a number of years looking at that Goldstream corridor. And we're hearing some good news from them now. They're working on a South Island transportation strategy. They're working on a very expensive project to improve that section through Goldstream Park. And the dream of an overpass to get people safely from the campground to the day use area may be more than just a dream. It might actually come to fruition. And part of that is what we're hearing from them is like a 3-meter wide paved cycling path that will parallel the highway and run right along the edge of the Goldstream River to provide safe transportation up and down that highways corridor. So these are the type of improvements that we've been looking forward to, and to be able to work with these other agencies that, quite frankly, have more capital to play with and partner with them on stuff like that is a good thing. And sorry, I don't have a PowerPoint presentation. I'm sorry, I don't have my webcam working because you won't be able to see my beautiful face today.
Well, thank you both. Didn't need a PowerPoint. This was really great information. Yeah, if anyone has any questions for Christine or Kirby, please put them in the question box. And now I will be turning the presentation over to Jeff Leahy from CRD. To give a little introduction. Jeff is currently the Senior Manager of CRD Regional Parks. Before that, he was the Regional Director of BC Parks in the Kamloops office, responsible for 2 million hectares of provincial parks in the Thompson Cariboo region. Jeff is a registered professional forester and has worked in the natural resource management field across BC for over 25 years. Thanks so much, Jeff.
Great. Well, first of all, thanks, Justine, for the invite. And I do see this as a great opportunity to share learnings and definitely an opportunity to learn from, other park systems, such as Victoria and definitely BC Parks, and also yourselves. And so maybe what I'll do is a bit about, what type of biking I do. And so I've lived in Smithers, Nelson, Grand Forks, and Kamloops, and now most recently Victoria, obviously. And so I've been in Victoria for a year and a half after coming from BC Parks. But most of my biking has always been, in Nelson was the yeehaw downhill stuff, and as I got older, it got quite a bit mellower. But it's mostly been off road up until now, and having moved to Victoria, it's definitely an exciting place to live. We have world-class parks and trails, and when I say parks, I look at parks as a whole system. I don't just look at CRD as a standalone. So what I'm going to before I get started, just want to emphasize, similar to what Christine has done, is that the safety of our employees and the public is definitely a top priority. So what you'll see up on the screen right now, you'll see what the system looks like in CRD. Just for CRD, in the darker green, you'll see that there's approximately 13 hectares that are protected, and the system is made up of 31 parks, 214 kilometers of trails, and then the regional trails themselves, which are highlighted in the blue, the red, the yellow, and then the double red line is our regional trails. So, and then just looking at, visitation, I think all park systems right now are seeing a fairly significant increase in visitation. And again, Christine alluded to the fact that, things are quite busy, really busy right now. And these are just some of the numbers that we've experienced in 2018. We're looking at, over between 7 and 8 million visits to regional parks and trails. Our top 4 visits are at the Galloping Goose at 2.1. Elk Beaver Lake is crazy busy at 1.6 million. Lochside Trail is 1.3, and Thetis Lake, at close to 500,000. We're seeing with the growth that this trend is going to increase. We're going to see a lot of the public wanting to get out and enjoy, the parks and trails. And so we always have to adjust and ensure that we continue to upgrade our park infrastructure and provide the opportunities that the public is looking for. So when we look at adapting to the COVID-19, as again, Christine, BC Parks has alluded to, the CRD takes its direction from the provincial health officer, whether it's the orders or the recommendations. So, we're really paying attention to what's going on out there from the park, from the provincial health officer. We're always in contact with the Vancouver Health Authority to give us some Vancouver Island Health Authority to give us guidance and direction on various activities that we have going on. But it's pretty key that the message that's coming to us is just that whole piece around social distancing. And so what we're seeing is what we've been seeing out in the parks is that we're getting a lot of the public is paying attention to the social distancing. And so we find that piece is being adhered to pretty closely. So what did we do to when we first found out about the COVID we really looked at, what can we do around the education piece, and what parts of the CRD system needs to be closed, or what activities need to be closed to make sure that we were in adherence to the PHO. And so, the whole thing around, no gatherings greater than 25, obviously the social distancing around the 2 meters. So we looked at all those pieces that were coming down the recommendations, and we obviously we closed things such as the nature center, campgrounds, fishing piers, water fountains, bike racks, playgrounds, etc. But we focused a lot, and we also adapted and restructured our organization. So we took a lot of our staff, we took the majority of our staff that are in interpretation, put them on the ground, and make sure that they were educating the public on, the PHO orders and the recommendations. And so for some of you that have been out in the trails and in the parks, you probably saw, some of our interpreters out there, sharing the information, the education, and just making sure that we were getting that message out there. And it was so important for us to be able to keep the parks open and the trails open to get that education and messaging out there. So, some of the things that allowed us, again, to keep the parks open, obviously the washroom facilities are being cleaned and sanitized regularly. We saw increased staff presence in the parks and trails for outreach and education. We also put into place a compliance action plan. So it was kind of like a two-tiered action plan. So we had the interpreters out there doing the education and then the outreach. We had our rangers out there doing, making sure that people were voluntarily complying to the orders and recommendations. And, where we had some of our hot spots, anything that it's not specifically related to COVID, but, just some of the stuff that was happening out there around, illegal dumping, and that was happening somewhat given the constraints being put on the landfills. We had, lots of our areas that were closed off were still being utilized. So it was, bringing in that additional enforcement component to ensure that the public safety and health was being maintained. Definitely posted lots of signage around the parks. We had increased social media messaging, and the parking lots. We had to keep the parking lots open. Otherwise, people were just spilling out onto the streets and causing all kinds of traffic disruptions. The other thing that we kept track of all the interactions that we had with the public, and there was definitely hundreds of interactions that we had. The interpreters were making connections with at least a couple hundred a day. So that really gave us a pulse on whether are we doing the right thing or not with regards to ensuring that the public has access to the park. So here's just an example of some of the educational messaging. We really emphasized that we needed the public to ensure that they were adhering to the recommendations and the PHO, and that was the only option that was available to ensure that we could keep the parks open, because if we couldn't get the public to adhere to that, there was no way that we'd be able to keep the parks and trails open. So there's one here and this is not really, again, a lot of this isn't COVID related, but share the trails, warn other trail user presence. But the whole piece around maintaining appropriate social distancing where possible was definitely a new piece associated with the COVID-19. This is one of our interpreters in front of one of our signs, and these individuals, the interpreters, were at some of our major entrances to our parks and trails, and these were essentially our main messages. Don't use parks and trails if you're sick. Obviously, the 2 meters. Restricting groups to households. Keep the bubble to your household. And then just yielding on narrow sections and share the trails and warn each other and maintain the 2 meters. between yourselves when on the trail. So, and be prepared to have limited or no access to parks facilities such as toilets, playgrounds, or picnic areas. Just being creative with some of our signage. A couple of the interpreters used this diagram to show what 6 feet 2 meters actually looks like. And again, focusing on our health and safety, just making sure that not only would the public stay 6 feet apart, but we encouraged our interpreters and those that are doing the outreach programs that make sure that the public stayed 6 feet away from them. And we did provide additional training to the outreach people around the COVID-19, making sure that they were aware of what was required if they were engaging with the public. So here's again some messaging that we had out there: travel in single file, stay to the right of the trail, and only pass when you maintain social distance between yourself and others. And that wasn't always possible. We found that wasn't always possible. We found what we were finding just from some of the communications that we were having with the public is, you know, a lot of people were just stepping to the side and allowing others to pass. So common sense just had to prevail, and we found that for the most part, the public was quite respectful and aware of when people were about to pass. And so coming to June, campgrounds reopened June 5th. So essentially in June, everything has reopened with the exception of our picnic shelters and our fountains. And again, for the most part, we found that the public is being quite respectful. A lot of the monitoring that we're doing, we're finding that that the public is just so appreciative of the parks and trails being open that that people are definitely being respectful of the social distancing and the orders of the public health officer. So maybe just a couple things I was thinking of is just what's worked well during this time, and it's definitely unprecedented times, and you know, without the provincial direction and, you know, the local health authority support, it really brought us all together and gave us, you know, the information that we needed to make sure that we could keep our parks and trails open during this time. Again, such as focus on safety and training of our operational staff to ensure that they were paying attention to the public health officers, again, orders and recommendations, providing risk assessments, making sure that staff had the appropriate public or personal safety equipment. And I got nothing but great things to say about definitely the CRD park staff, but in general park staff, but definitely the CRD park staff, just amazing attitude, you know, just being out there willing to provide the service and the willingness during this time, knowing full well that, you know, keeping the parks and trails open are so critical to a person's health, and that we talked about that so much about, you know, the value of keeping these areas open and the role that plays, and taking a sense of pride in being able to being part of looking out for, you know, the public's health and safety, and flexibility and adaptability, you know, making sure that our operations were adaptable, spending more time on the educational side of things, to ensure that the public was aware of what was going on out in the parks and what was appropriate use and respectful use. And lots of kudos goes out to the public themselves. Tons of appreciation for for using the parks respectfully, respecting park workers, and that's really what allowed us to keep the trails open. Some of the challenging or trickier pieces was, it was just incredible to see the amount of use that we were getting. Parking was just a huge challenge. The vehicles were spilling out onto the roads, and that was definitely one of our biggest challenges was around just the parking itself. And then obviously the requirement of the additional resources for the cleaning, and we've, vehicles has been a big problem for us too, because we're only allowing the one person per vehicle right now. So so that's about it. And the key message was out to the public is just respect each other and your parks.
Thanks so much, Jeff. Yeah, I know we all appreciate all the work that CRD is doing. And yeah, and I think everyone appreciates all the opportunities to get outside. Our next presenter is Sarah Webb, and she's from the City of Victoria. Hi, Sarah.
Hello.
To share your PowerPoint, you'll see on the right side of your screen a little screen button. Perfect.
Yeah, that's great. I've realized that I've started with 2 split screens and a laptop to make it work. So it may be that I have to shut down my video camera and just speak to you guys through voice in order to make that happen. So I am hoping that you might be able to see my slides pretty darn quick here.
Sure.
I'm gonna maybe move it onto this side. Can you see those?
Yeah, perfect.
Great. Thanks very much, everyone. Well, thanks very much for having me today as part of this webinar. And I've just wanted to provide some content around responding to both the pandemic and responding recovery through transportation and mobility. From the City of Victoria's perspective, our focus has been really around Go Victoria. And in 2019, the city adopted a new sustainable mobility strategy as we bring forward and think about how we manage our roads and our public spaces to provide safe and convenient ways for people to get around. And that's not just about moving people, but also goods and services. As a part of our Go Victoria, we've established a vision for clean, seamless mobility options for everyone. And that vision is really important as we think about in the context of the pandemic, but also in terms of recovery and what it might mean as we go through second or third waves of the COVID-19. And as well as I provide some insights to you today, the elephant in the room will be, are we doing enough? Is there more to do? How do we do things differently? And what are some of the big trade-offs that we're making when we talk about using mobility and transportation to give more people options and to be able to support the objectives that the city has on a bigger picture as being not only the destination and hub for the capital region, but with very real transportation and mobility pressures that have come from the changing dynamics of COVID. For those people who aren't familiar with Go Victoria, one of the key components of how we're responding to the pandemic is based on our values, and that is really about safety, livability and well-being, equity and affordability, taking action on climate change and ensuring accessible and connected networks, and that you'll see kind of come through this presentation. And as we know, there are many different types of disruptors and instigators in the mobility space, and that might include things like rideshare and new vehicle types that cities are dealing with, new mobility services, and how we change our right-of-way use to be able to enable the private use of public space. Autonomous vehicles and mobility as a system are absolutely huge disruptors in this space. But of course, what we're here talking about today is COVID and how it truly has been both a disruptor and an instigator for the City of Victoria in terms of how we respond. So as a city, we're one of many that are reflecting on and responding to both the short-term and longer-term impacts of COVID. And how people are getting around during the pandemic, during March, April, and May is very different from what we've already seen in June. And definitely we know that the municipality is going to see different kinds of impacts along the way. And so as a part of our pandemic response, our goal was really to ensure that we're maintaining our transportation systems to safely move essential people and goods. We knew that people needed to be able to get around. While there was a lot of people staying at home, there were many people and suppliers that needed to move goods and services and people throughout our city. Our objectives were to relieve crowded areas and manage our right-of-way. To support those recommendations, like my colleagues at the CRD and the province had said, followed directly by the guidelines from the provincial health officer. Our goal was to improve comfort on roads for increased transportation use and physical distancing, recognizing that many people were using walking and cycling as a form of recreation as well as a form of mobility and transportation, and also to address the new and very quickly shifting delivery and pickup needs that popped up around the city. Some of the key considerations that we've taken when we were looking at pandemic response were really about looking to evaluate neighborhoods systematically and taking an equity-based lens. So we weren't just simply picking and choosing one street over another. We were really understanding what were some of the criteria that we're implementing in order to be able to make some of these changes. We also have to acknowledge the trade-offs and very real difficult decisions that we have to make. In order to create physical distancing zones, for example, we may need to make changes to the road right-of-way, and that surprises people because they're used to being able to park their vehicle, let's say, right outside the front of their house. And in many cases, there are very real trade-offs and difficult decisions that staff have to make, but going back through that systematic approach has helped us really ground our efforts. While transit service was not a direct City of Victoria responsibility, we did have a component to responding in the pandemic, which related to both shelter maintenance and cleaning, as well as our youth transit pass program, which we adapted during the pandemic after the fare freeze session was completed by the province and BC Transit. And ultimately, we also recognize that during the pandemic, there was a great opportunity for us to get some work done, and you'll see some big changes that happened on roads during March, April, and May. But at the same time, we were very much faced with the same kinds of challenges that our colleagues at the province and CRD were facing, with making sure that we had safe environments for our staff to be working in and our crews to be working in. So some of the things we did during the pandemic was giving informational signage just like everybody else in terms of giving people those key messages, working very closely not only on our regional trail systems, but in areas where we did have narrow pathways and giving people an opportunity to educate themselves and take action rather than closing down any pathways. Our goal was to really ensure that we were keeping and maintaining as many of our pathways and walkways as possible. We also implemented our traffic signal automation project, and 44 of 60 locations were completed in the month of March. And that was focused really around intersections near grocery stores and pharmacies and essential services adjacent to hospitals and care facilities, and busy intersections with wide crossings. The second phase followed up a week or two later, which was near parks, on greenways and multimodal routes, and near schools or fields where people were congregating and playing at a distance, of course. So that traffic signal automation was something that, you know, for many people was a trade-off, because we wanted to reduce those touch points for people to not have to push the button and improve level of service for pedestrians. But of course, if you were on a bus or if you were in a motor vehicle, you might now be stopping more regularly at that intersection. So it is about figuring out what was that right response, and we were really excited about getting 44 locations done in the city where pedestrians are given back that priority, and there's a no-touch signal that goes with it. We also installed physical distancing zones. These were linear zones in our village centers and areas in our neighborhoods where we were very intentionally looking to create a 2-meter wide extended patio space, or extended walkway space rather. And we did this in James Bay in a couple of locations, both on Dallas Road and on Simcoe. And we have Fairfield over on St. Charles Street. In North Park, we've got Cook Street. Hillside and Quadra, we did some changes on 5th, and then of course Beacon Hill Park itself had some major changes to be able to remove automobiles from driving through the park and restricting vehicle use so that we had more space for pedestrians and people to be physically distant. So those were 3 or 4 like kind of immediate things that were done during the pandemic phase. And I think where we then moved into very quickly was the recovery phase. And even still, while we're being very mindful of where we're at as a province, understanding what are the requirements that we have to be able to support recovery while still supporting those physical distancing components and being prepared for a second wave of the pandemic. And so because we don't know all the future, it doesn't mean we don't know anything about the future. And so part of our goal is to really understand how maybe some of these impacts of COVID for both good and perhaps bad are going to be impacting how people get around in the city and how they interact in terms of mobility. And a big take home for us is ensuring that we're adaptable and flexible. We have a lot of uncertainties, and it is important for us to be thinking around shorter term horizons and implementation that may take priority over other planned projects, and that is always a difficult balance to have. The Build Back Victoria program is more of our recovery focused, and that's where we're using mobility and transportation infrastructure to support businesses and business recovery, as well as community recovery, kind of typically under that mobility lens. So our goal there was around practical, achievable, and expedited solutions, bureaucracy light, if you will. Again, continuing to align, just like our pandemic response, our recovery programs are really focused on aligning with public health officer recommendations, ensuring safety and accessibility, not come off the table while we're doing these kinds of efforts. And again, thinking about equity across programs and neighborhoods. As we developed programs, we also wanted to ensure that it was applicant driven, that we were offering nimble and flexible solutions, and acknowledge the value of public space. And if we're going to start to use public space differently and think of our roads differently, as we articulate in Go Victoria, but perhaps have been more quickly accelerated with COVID-19, we know that there's really a great opportunity to acknowledge the value of public space in a way and have a new conversation. And I think for a lot of people, they've recognized that COVID has stimulated new discussions around how much space is dedicated to pedestrians and cyclists. Where does it mean for us as we look at supporting business operations in the public right of way? And of course, thinking about our recovery, we also need to think about both residents and businesses. As I mentioned, safety and accessibility are kind of key priorities, and this is again where trade-offs and difficult decisions come very, very quick to the forefront. You know, allowing people to have use private space means that we are changing the dynamic, and we have to be very careful to ensure that we're still creating that wonderful free experience for people to be in, and not just simply using all of our space in our mobility world. We also have to recognize that there is a trade-off looking at traffic circulation, parking related impacts, and the very practical needs that businesses and community members still have, like commercial loading zones and transit stops and taxi stalls. And recognizing that our Rebuild Victoria, Build Back Victoria program is very much focused on these different phases, and recognizing that there is a potential wave of a second wave of pandemic. We have introduced a suite of solutions to our business community and our neighborhoods. This includes a number of new grant programs, as well as new places to operate within our community. So we have flex spaces, which are basically quickly adaptable on-street or in boulevard locations to be able to give people an opportunity to set up their business and do business on the road right of way. Similarly, temporary patios start out with a flex zone, but then get upgraded to a more semi-permanent parklet or patio space. Here are some of the examples of the kinds of installations and applications we're already seeing. The city had launched this program on June 8th, and we've already approved and implemented a number of these zones. We're also manufactured and now are selling at a cost recovery basis new parklets to be able to install on the street in place of on-street parking. We've also introduced new curbside loading opportunities where we've got non-commercial loading, customer pickup and drop off. Again, this can be not only for vehicles, but also bicycles, and looking at kind of that synergies between multiple businesses on a block to find enough space to be able to ensure turnover. We've also opened up our parks for a number of businesses, and that includes those who are kind of targeted primarily at health and recreation and fitness, but also could include things like bicycle tours and other sorts of commerce oriented in our parks systems. Again, ensuring that we're keeping our public parks open, but we're using the parks for private space and private use as well. And finally, we've also got a new mobile vending program that supports both bike vendors and food truck vendors across different locations in our city, ensuring that we can continue to move people around, but also animate places outside of our downtown core with business opportunities, bike vendors and food truck vendors that may have been typically involved in festivals and events at this time of the year that are no longer happening. Another area that we've continued to push on is our temporary road closures, and so the city is entertaining and welcoming applications for businesses or community organizations to put together street closures or travel lane restrictions. This is building off a program that we already have in place, but really looking at what can we do to support that temporary animation and the use of community space on our roads to be able to support both active transportation and business recovery. One of the big areas that we have been initiating is on Government Street. I'm sure that if you haven't picked up a newspaper or turned on the radio, somebody's been talking about Government Street for the last little while. It's really representing a step change in our downtown streetscape, where we have a couple of flexible zones where we have on-street commercial areas, and then we with motor vehicle and bicycle traffic, and then we also have a zone where we have a full pedestrian closure. And so as I kind of look to wrap up here, I guess a couple of kind of pieces is the Government Street pilot is very much still in the same learning and adapting and being animated through arts and culture. We've had a number of businesses who have now put forward applications for permits, and you'll see starting down at the south end at Humboldt Street. Vehicles and bicycles can still travel northwards, and on each side of the road, we're allowing new flexible spaces to be able to support animation and business operations. We've also done a full street closure between Fort Street and View Street, again allowing for the use of space. You'll see some new parklets in there as barriers, as well as some new picnic tables, and you'll soon start to see businesses who are now going to be operating. Finally, the last northern portion of this goes right through up to Gate Street and really provides that opportunity for us to utilize our streetscape in a different way. Government Street was chosen because of its long history and desire around seeing those changes, and it was a council strategic priority. All of these things, pandemic response as well as recovery efforts through Build Back Victoria, really do require this kind of comprehensive approach to education and monitoring. Like our colleagues at the province and CRD articulated, the reality is that this is about learning all the way and bringing together multiple teams with different disciplines to ensure that we're really educating people and that we're giving them the understanding of why these projects are in place and how they support the city's bigger picture goals while aligning with the public health officer recommendations. So both pandemic response and recovery requires us to be implementing, learning, and adapting, perhaps at different speeds that we used to, and be bold and be open to collaborating. And we know that as a city, we're trying to pivot very quickly while still kind of continuing to implement our major projects and policy initiatives related to transportation mobility. So I hope that gives you a very quick sample of what we've been doing in terms of responding to the pandemic, as well as helping recovery efforts for our Build Back Victoria program. Thank you.
Sarah, thank you so much. And thank you to all of our presenters today. We are running a bit low on time here, so I may just ask folks to send in their questions. Yeah, thank you, Kirby, Christine, Sarah, and Jeff, all today. We really appreciate it. Here at the Bike to Work Society, we're always trying to figure out how to connect with pedestrians and cyclists all over the Greater Victoria area, and you made it very clear on how we can keep moving and stay safe during this time. I was hoping to do a quick just a reminder to folks of things that are going on over on our side. Next week, next week, we're going to have another webinar on Tuesday the 23rd at 10 a.m. and that is called Accessibility in Recreation, Activity, and Cycling. And we've also invited 3 guests to come speak with us on those topics. As always, the webinars are free, and we encourage folks to become a member of the Bike to Work Society or the Greater Victoria Cycling Coalition, or you can also donate for our programs on our webinar workshop page on our website, which is biketoworkvictoria.ca. You can follow us on Instagram and Twitter. You can follow us on Facebook. Check out our cycling resource library. We'll be posting information from this webinar as well as past webinars and anything to do with cycling. We are also putting out many scavenger hunts, which is also a weekly exciting activity for folks who are hoping to be cycling. I hope everyone stays safe out there, continuing to use all the suggestions that the folks from BC Parks, CRD, and City of Victoria gave us today. I will be emailing folks who have sent in their questions that we didn't get to today, unfortunately. But yeah, thank you again. I can't thank again, like everyone taking so much time out of their schedules just to speak with us, and I know everyone really appreciates it. So I think that'll be the end. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye now.